Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Thomas Edison tried many times to make his ideas work. People asked him about failing. He said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Imagine a time when the night was truly dark. When the sun went down, it was very hard to see. People used candles and gas lamps, but they were not very bright. Then there was a man named Thomas Edison. He was a special man. He was very curious. He wanted to know how everything worked. He was also very hard-working. He never stopped trying. Thomas Edison wanted to make light. He wanted to make a light that could change the world. This is the story of how he made the world brighter. It is the story of Thomas Edison. It is a story about never giving up, even when things are difficult. This is the story of a boy who changed the night. Chapter 1. A Curious Boy. Thomas Alva Edison, but everyone called him Al, was a small boy with a big head and bright, curious eyes. He was born in a little town called Milan, in Ohio, in the United States. It was a cold winter day, the 11th of February, 1847. Al was the youngest of 7 children, but only 4 of the children lived to grow up. His older siblings, William Pitt and Harriet, called Tanny, and his sister Marion, were much older than him. Al's father, Samuel Edison, was a tall, strong man who had many jobs. He built things, sold things, and even grew food to sell. Al's mother, Nancy Edison, had been a teacher. She was a kind and patient woman, and she loved books. Al loved her very much. When Al was 7 years old, his family moved to a new town, Port Huron, in Michigan. It was a busy place near a big lake. Al's father built a big white house for them, high on a hill, with a view of the water and forest. Al was not like other children. He always asked questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds sing? How does fire burn? He wanted to know everything. He wasn't always playing with toys. Instead, he was always looking, thinking, and asking questions. His mother always encouraged him to ask as many questions as he likes. That's what made him so curious. He went to school, but it was not easy for him. He was always at the bottom of the class. He did not like to sit still and listen. He wanted to move, to touch, to explore. His teacher thought he was slow. One day, Al heard his teacher talking about him. He said Al was too slow to learn. Al ran home crying and told his mother. She was very angry. Nancy Edison knew her son was not slow. She knew he was different. He was curious, always asking why. He learned by doing, not just by listening. So, Nancy decided to teach Al at home. She became his only teacher. She taught him to read and write. She taught him about history and numbers. But most importantly, she taught him to love learning. She gave him books about science and nature. One of the books was called Natural Philosophy. It was a big book full of information about the world and how it worked. Al loved this book. He read it again and again. He learned about matter and its properties, mechanics, 6 fundamental instruments: the lever, the pulley, the wedge, the screw, the inclined plane, and the wheel, vacuums, steam engines, electricity, magnetism, light, sound, and many other things. The book had pictures, and Al studied them carefully. He learned how things were made and how they worked. He started to understand that the world was full of amazing things waiting to be discovered. Al's father, Sam, also taught him things. He was a strong man with a loud voice and a love for big ideas. He taught Al about politics and the world. He gave him books by a writer named Thomas Paine, who wrote about freedom and reason. Sam's thoughts and the books helped make Al a free thinker. At home, Al was a busy boy. He helped his father in the garden. He grew vegetables and sold them in town. He even built his first laboratory in the cellar of his house. It was a small place, but it was full of bottles and jars. Al collected chemicals and did experiments. He mixed things together and watched what happened. He was a scientist, even at a young age. He was also a bit of a prankster, meaning he liked to play jokes, sometimes with his chemicals. He even gave some Seidlitz powders to a boy, promising him it would make him fly. The boy, named Michael Oates, didn't fly, of course. He just got very sick, and Al got in trouble. The world was big. The opportunities seemed endless. He started thinking of ways to make money using the railroad. He knew that when you are making your own money, you can do anything you want with it, even buying materials for your own experiments. Al's mind was always busy with questions, experiments, and plans. He was not like the other children, and some people thought he was strange. But his mother knew he was special. She knew he was curious, and that was a good thing. She knew he would do great things one day. She believed in him, even when others did not. This made Al feel strong and confident. He knew he could learn anything, and he was not afraid to try. Chapter 2. The Deaf Boy. Life changed for Thomas when he was still a young boy. It wasn't a sudden change, like a storm. It was slow, quiet, and took away a part of his world, piece by piece. Thomas started to lose his hearing. People noticed he didn't always hear them. They had to speak louder, much louder, for him to understand. At first, it was just a little problem. Maybe he wasn't paying attention, some thought. But it got worse. Sounds became muffled, like they were far away, even when they were close. Imagine the world becoming quieter each day. The sounds that everyone else heard easily, Thomas struggled to catch. The cheerful songs of birds in the morning, the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. These sounds started to fade for him. He said later that he hadn't heard a bird sing properly since he was 12 years old. Doctors weren't sure exactly why Thomas was losing his hearing. Some said it was because of scarlet fever he had as a child. Scarlet fever could leave people with problems for life. Other people thought it might be from an accident. Young Thomas was known for getting into scrapes. Perhaps he had hurt his ear somehow. No one was certain. But the silence grew. For a boy who loved to learn about the world, losing his hearing could have been a disaster. Sound is everywhere, and so much of what we learn comes through our ears. But Thomas was not a boy who gave up easily. Instead of letting the silence stop him, he found new ways to explore the world. Perhaps, in a strange way, his deafness helped him. Because the world became quieter, Thomas learned to focus more on what he could see and feel. He became very observant. He watched how things worked, how machines moved, how light changed. He paid attention to the small details that other people might miss because they were too busy listening. He also learned to concentrate deeply. With fewer sounds to distract him, he could focus on his thoughts, his experiments, his ideas. The silence became his own special world, a place where he could think and imagine without interruption. He might have missed the sounds of the world, but he found something else in the quiet, a space for his mind to grow and create. And so, Thomas, the deaf boy, did not become sad and withdrawn. He became even more determined. He found a different path, a quieter path, but a path that would lead him to incredible discoveries. His deafness was a challenge, yes, but it was also a part of what made him Thomas Edison, the boy who would change the world, even without hearing all of it. Chapter 3. The Newsboy on the Train. Life changed again for Thomas when he was 12 years old. He was a boy who needed to work. His family needed money, and Thomas was ready to help. He saw an opportunity on the Grand Trunk Railroad. This was a big train line that went between Port Huron and Detroit. Thomas decided to become a newsboy on this train. Every morning, early in the day, Thomas would go to the train station. He wasn't going on a trip for fun. This train was his office, his classroom, and sometimes It even felt like his home. He would climb aboard the baggage car, which was a big space at the front of the train. It wasn't fancy, but it was his workspace now. His job was to sell things to the passengers. He had a basket full of newspapers, of course. People on the train wanted to read the news of the day, especially about the Civil War. Thomas would walk through the carriages, holding up the newspapers and calling out, "Get your Detroit Free Press. Read all about the war." But newspapers weren't the only things in his basket. He was a smart boy, and he knew people get hungry and thirsty on long train rides. So he also sold candy, like little sticks of peppermint and chewy caramels. He sold fruit too, like bright red apples and juicy peaches when they were in season. He even sold popcorn balls, sweet and sticky, which were a favorite treat. Thomas worked hard. He walked up and down the train carriages many times each day. He learned to balance himself when the train moved fast, and how to speak loudly enough so people could hear him over the noise of the wheels and the steam engine. He learned to smile and be polite, even when he was tired. He knew that if he was friendly, people would be more likely to buy from him. Being a newsboy was more than just selling things. It was a way to see the world. The train traveled through towns and countryside he had never seen before. He saw busy cities and quiet farms. He watched people get on and off the train, each with their own stories and destinations. He was always meeting new faces. He also learned about business. He understood that if he bought his newspapers and candy for a low price, he could sell them for a higher price and keep the difference. This difference was his profit, his earnings. He was becoming a businessman, even at 12 years old. Sometimes it was not easy. Some days few people bought newspapers. Some days his basket felt very heavy and his legs felt very tired. And sometimes he was lonely on the train. He missed his family and his home in Fort Gratiot. But he was a determined boy. He knew he was helping his family, and he was learning new things every day. On the train, Thomas was independent. He was in charge of his own time and his own work. He made his own decisions. He learned to solve problems quickly. If he ran out of candy, he had to figure out how to get more in Detroit. If a passenger was unhappy, he had to find a way to make them smile again. He was learning to think for himself, to be resourceful, and to take care of himself. This train, this noisy, moving world, was Thomas Edison's first real job. It was where he learned to work hard, to be smart with money, and to be independent. It was the beginning of his journey, a journey that would take him far beyond the railway tracks and into a world of light and invention. Chapter 4. The Telegraph Man. Thomas left the train and the busy streets of selling newspapers behind. He was ready for something new, something more interesting. He found it in the clicking sounds of the telegraph. In those days, telegraphs were like magic. They could send messages far away, very quickly, using electricity. It was a new technology, and it was important for businesses and for news. Thomas was interested right away. He saw a chance to learn and to do something important. He got a job as a telegraph operator. It wasn't easy to learn. Morse code, the language of the telegraph, was made of dots and dashes. These dots and dashes made letters, and letters made words. It took time to learn to hear the difference between them, to understand the fast clicks and pauses. But Thomas was determined. He practiced and practiced. He listened carefully to the sounds coming from the machine. Soon, he was good, very good. He could send and receive messages quickly and accurately. He worked long hours, often at night, sending news and important messages across the wires. He traveled to different cities to work in telegraph offices. He saw more of the world than he ever had before. Working as a telegraph operator was more than just a job for Thomas. It was his school. In the telegraph office, he was surrounded by clever men. He listened to their conversations. He learned about business, about news, about how the world worked. He read books and newspapers in his free time, always wanting to know more. The telegraph office was also his first real laboratory. He was always curious about the machines, about how they worked. When something broke, Thomas wanted to fix it. He took things apart, looked inside, and put them back together. He learned by doing, by touching, by experimenting. He started to make his own improvements to the telegraph. He wanted to make it better, faster, more efficient. He tinkered with the wires, the batteries, the machines. He tried new ideas. Some worked, and many didn't. But with each try, he learned something new. One day, something happened that changed his life again. He was working late at night, as usual, when he noticed a problem with one of the telegraph machines. It wasn't working right. The other operators were getting frustrated, but Thomas looked at it closely. He used his hands, his tools, and his growing knowledge of electricity to understand what was wrong. And then, he fixed it. He made the machine work again. The other operators were impressed. They saw that Thomas was not just a good operator, he was more than that. He was a man who understood machines. He was a man who could fix things. He was becoming known as someone special, someone who could do amazing things with electricity and machines. This was just the beginning for Thomas, the telegraph man. He was learning, inventing, and getting ready for even bigger things to come. His time as a telegraph operator was shaping him into the inventor the world would soon know. Chapter 5. New York City. Thomas Edison arrived in New York City in the spring of 1869, a young man of 22 with little more than his skills and a head full of ideas. Leaving behind the familiar workshops of Newark, New Jersey, he stepped into a world that was a whirlwind of noise and ambition. New York was a city on the rise, a place where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye, and Edison was determined to make his mark. For someone used to the quieter pace of smaller towns, New York was a shock. The streets roared with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the shouts of vendors. Buildings scraped the sky, and the air buzzed with a frantic energy that was both exciting and overwhelming. It was a city that never slept, a place where opportunity seemed to hang thick in the air, if only you knew where to grab it. Edison didn't come to New York for sightseeing, though. He was there to work, to invent, and to make a living from his talent. He quickly found a small workshop in the city, a cramped space buzzing with the same restless energy as the streets outside. It wasn't a grand laboratory like he would later build, but it was his. Here, surrounded by coils of wire, batteries, and the scent of chemicals, Edison felt at home. The city itself became his new laboratory. He observed the flow of people, the workings of businesses, the constant hum of activity. His mind, always searching for practical solutions, began to generate a flurry of new inventions. Many of these early New York inventions were related to his old passion, the telegraph. He worked tirelessly to improve existing systems, to make them faster, more efficient, and more reliable for the booming world of commerce and finance. One of his early successes in New York was an improved stock ticker. These machines, clattering away in brokerage houses across the city, were vital for the fast-paced world of Wall Street. Edison's design was simpler and more efficient than existing models, and it caught the attention of the Gold and Stock Telegraph Company, a major player in the financial information business. This was a breakthrough. It wasn't just tinkering in a workshop anymore. This was invention with a purpose, invention that could earn him real money. But New York was not without its challenges. Competition was fierce, and the pressure to constantly innovate was intense. Edison was surrounded by clever and ambitious individuals, all vying for attention and success. The city was also expensive, and making ends meet while setting up his workshop and pursuing his inventions was a constant struggle. He lived frugally, often working late into the night to save on the cost of heating and lighting. Despite the hardships, Edison thrived in New York. The city's relentless pace matched his own boundless energy. The challenges fueled his creativity. The competition spurred him on. He was in his element, a young inventor in a city that celebrated ambition and innovation. New York was a proving ground, and Thomas Edison, the curious boy from Ohio, was ready to prove himself. He was determined to not just survive, but to conquer this bustling metropolis with the power of his inventions and to make his name known in the city that never slept. Chapter 6. The Talking Machine. Thomas Edison was in his laboratory at Menlo Park. This place was his world. It was full of wires, machines, and strange smells. He loved being there, surrounded by his ideas and his work. He always thought about new things to invent. He wanted to make life better, easier, more interesting. One day, Edison had a new idea. He was working on the telegraph, a machine that sent messages over wires. But what if a machine could send more than just dots and dashes? What if a machine could send sounds, like music or voices? This idea excited him. He wanted to make a machine that could capture sound and play it back later. He wanted to invent a talking machine. Edison started to experiment. He used different materials and different tools. He tried to make a machine that could write sound. He knew that sound was made of waves, like ripples in water. He thought if he could capture these waves, he could save them and play them back. He worked with a thin piece of tinfoil, a shiny metal-like paper. He wrapped the tinfoil around a cylinder, a metal tube that could turn. He used a needle, a sharp point, and attached it to a diaphragm, a thin piece of material that vibrated when sound hit it. He spoke into a horn connected to the needle. As he spoke, the sound waves made the diaphragm vibrate. The vibrating diaphragm moved the needle. The needle pressed into the tinfoil as the cylinder turned. It made tiny dents and grooves in the tinfoil. These dents were a record of his voice. Then came the moment to listen. Edison carefully moved the needle back to the start of the tinfoil. He turned the handle again, making the cylinder spin. The needle followed the grooves it had made. And then something amazing happened. From the machine, a sound came. It was faint and a little unclear, but it was sound. It was his voice. The machine was talking. Edison and his helpers listened carefully. They could hear words. The first words ever recorded and played back by a machine were, "Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow." It was a simple rhyme, but it was a revolution. Everyone in the laboratory was excited. They had made history. They had created something new, something incredible. Edison's talking machine, the phonograph, was born. The phonograph was more than just a machine. It was a way to capture moments, to save memories, to share voices and music across time and distance. It was a miracle of science and invention. It was Thomas Edison's talking machine, and it would change the world. It was the start of a new era of sound. Chapter 7. Menlo Park and Light. Thomas Edison needed more space. His workshop in Newark was too small. He had too many ideas, too many machines, and too many helpers. He needed a place to build big things and try new experiments. So, he decided to move. He found a quiet place in the countryside of New Jersey. It was called Menlo Park. It was not really a park, but a small village near some woods. It was far from the noise of the city. Edison bought some land there. He built a laboratory in Menlo Park. It was not just one room. It was a big wooden building, 2 stories high. It had many windows to let in light. Inside, there was a machine shop with tools and machines. There was a chemistry lab with bottles and strange smells. There was a library full of books about science and inventions. This was Edison's new invention factory. He wanted to make it a place where he and his helpers could work together to create new things. He brought his best men from Newark to Menlo Park. Young men, full of energy and ideas, came to work for him. They were like a family, all working for the same goal. In Menlo Park, Edison started to work on a big problem: electric light. People used gas lamps and candles to see in the dark, but these lights were smoky and dangerous. Edison wanted to make a light that was clean, safe, and bright using electricity. It was a very difficult task. Many people had tried to make electric light before, but nobody had succeeded in making one that lasted long. and was cheap enough for everyone to use. Some scientists said it was impossible. But Thomas Edison did not believe in impossible. He believed he could make electric light. He started to experiment with different materials. He tried different kinds of metal and different shapes. He wanted to find something that would glow brightly when electricity went through it, but not burn up too quickly. He and his team worked long hours in the Menlo Park lab. They worked day and night, trying different ideas. They tried thousands of different experiments. Sometimes things exploded. Sometimes they made smoke and strange smells. Often they failed. But Edison never stopped. He knew that if he could make a good light bulb, it would change the world. People in cities could work and play at night. Homes would be safer and brighter. Electric light would make life better for everyone. This was his new dream, and he was determined to make it real in his new laboratory at Menlo Park. Chapter 8. The Search for Light. Menlo Park was a busy place, but now it was focused on one thing: light. Thomas Edison wanted to make a light that was bright, long-lasting, and safe. He wanted to create electric light for everyone, not just the rich who could afford arc lamps. This was a huge challenge, perhaps the biggest he had ever faced. The problem was the light bulb itself. Edison knew how to make electricity flow. He had the power. But inside the bulb, something had to glow when the electricity passed through it. This something was the filament. It had to be thin, strong, and last a long time without burning up. Finding the right material for this filament became Edison's obsession. He started trying everything. He asked his team, "What can we use?" They looked at metals, like platinum. Platinum was special because it could get very hot without melting. Edison and his men spent days working with platinum. They made thin wires and put them inside glass bulbs. They pumped out the air to create a vacuum, so the filament wouldn't burn quickly. But platinum had a problem. It was very expensive. A light bulb made with platinum would cost too much for most people. Edison wanted light for everyone, not just the rich. So, he tried other metals. He tested different kinds of wire. He tried different shapes for the filament: coils, loops, even zigzags. Each time he hoped for success. Each time the light was too weak or it burned out too quickly. The bulbs would glow brightly for a few minutes, then dim and die. Failure after failure. Some people started to doubt if electric light was even possible. Some said gas light was better, cheaper, and easier. But Edison was not a man who gave up. He had a special way of working. He experimented, he tested, he failed, and then he tried again. He believed that if he kept trying, he would find the answer. He told his team, "We just have to keep going." He filled notebooks with ideas, drawings, and notes from his experiments. He wanted to learn from every failure. "Tell me what went wrong," he would ask his assistants after another light bulb burned out. He saw failures not as defeats, but as steps on the road to success. He and his team worked long hours in the Menlo Park laboratory. They worked through the day, and they worked through the night. They were like explorers in a new land, searching for something precious. The air in the lab was often filled with smoke, the smell of chemicals, and the sound of machines. Edison himself, with his messy hair and stained clothes, looked like a man who lived in his workshop. He tested thousands of materials. He looked at plants, paper, even hair. He wanted something that was not expensive like platinum, something that was common and easy to find. He wanted something that could glow brightly and last. It was a long and difficult search. Many days, it seemed impossible. But in Menlo Park, in the middle of all the failures, the hope for electric light still burned bright. Edison knew, deep down, that somewhere, in some material, the answer was waiting to be found. Chapter 9. The First Light. The Menlo Park laboratory buzzed with a different kind of energy that autumn. It was a nervous energy, mixed with hope and exhaustion. For months, Thomas Edison and his team had been working tirelessly, chasing after a dream: to make light from electricity, light that was safe, steady, and affordable for everyone. Every corner of the lab was filled with equipment. Glass bulbs of all shapes and sizes sat on benches, waiting to be tested. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting batteries to strange-looking devices. The air smelled of chemicals and hot metal. Men worked late into the night, their faces lit by the flickering gaslight, their hands moving quickly, driven by Edison's unwavering determination. The problem was the light itself. They knew how to make a bright flash of electric light. Arc lights blazed in streets and factories. But that light was too harsh, too expensive, and burned out quickly. Edison wanted a soft, warm light, like a candle, but powered by electricity. The key, they believed, was the filament, the thin thread inside the bulb that would glow when electricity passed through it. They had tried everything. Platinum, a precious metal, seemed promising, but it was too expensive. Many other metals melted too quickly or burned out in a flash. They experimented with different shapes, different thicknesses, different materials. Each failure was a small sting, but Edison pushed them on. "We haven't found the right thing yet," he would say, his voice firm even when he was tired. "But we will." One day, Edison turned his attention to carbon. It was cheap. It was common. He had used carbon in his telephone transmitter, and it worked well to control electricity. Could carbon glow? He instructed his team to try different forms of carbon: paper, cotton thread, even wood. Francis Gell, one of Edison's most dedicated assistants, carefully prepared a thin strip of carbonized cotton thread. It was fragile, almost like dust. With trembling hands, he placed it inside a glass bulb and sealed it. Then came the moment of truth. Edison held the bulb carefully, his large head bent close. He connected wires to the base and slowly, cautiously, increased the electric current. The lab held its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint orange glow appeared inside the bulb. Slowly, the glow grew brighter, warmer. The thin thread of carbon inside was shining. It wasn't the harsh, bright light of an arc lamp. It was a gentle, steady glow, filling the glass bulb with a soft, warm light. It was like a tiny, contained sun. Edison watched, his blue-gray eyes fixed on the glowing filament. He didn't speak, didn't move. The other men in the lab gathered around, silent and awestruck. They had seen flashes of light before, short bursts that quickly faded. But this was different. This light was lasting. Minutes stretched into hours. The light continued to burn, steady and unwavering. Edison and his team took turns watching, checking, and waiting. They needed to know how long it would last. They watched through the night and into the next day. The light kept shining. Finally, after over 13 hours, the light began to dim, and then, slowly, faded away. The carbon filament had burned out, but it had burned for longer than anyone had ever seen before. A cheer erupted in the lab. Men slapped each other on the back, laughing and shouting. Edison himself, usually so calm, allowed a small smile to spread across his face. He didn't shout or jump, but his eyes shone brighter than any light bulb. "We did it," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We made light." It was just a small light, burning for a short time in a laboratory. But it was more than that. It was the first step towards changing the world. It was the first light bulb that truly worked, and it promised to bring light out of the darkness for everyone. The age of electric light had begun. Chapter 10. Lighting up the city. Thomas Edison had shown the world a new kind of light in his Menlo Park laboratory. But a single shining bulb was not enough. His dream was much bigger. He wanted to bring electric light to everyone, everywhere. And for Edison, that meant lighting up a whole city. He chose New York City as his first target, a place he knew well from his early days as an inventor. Lower Manhattan, with its busy streets and crowded buildings, would be the first part of the city to experience this incredible new technology. This was a challenge unlike any Edison had faced before. Making one light bulb was one thing, but creating a system to power thousands of lights across a city was something else entirely. He had to invent not just the light bulb, but everything that went with it. A power station to generate electricity, wires to carry the power, and systems to control and distribute it safely and reliably. The heart of this new system would be the Pearl Street Station. Edison found a suitable building at 257 Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan. It was an old, ordinary brick building, but it was about to become the world's first commercial power station. Inside, Edison and his team began to build their giant dynamos. These were massive machines, much larger than anything they had created in Menlo Park. They were powerful enough to generate the electricity needed to light up a whole district. Building the Pearl Street Station was a huge undertaking. Every piece of equipment had to be custom-made. Workers dug trenches in the streets to lay miles of underground wires. This was a noisy, messy, and complicated process in the already bustling streets of New York. People were curious and sometimes skeptical. Many still preferred the familiar glow of gaslight and doubted that this new electric light would ever truly work. There were many technical problems to solve. Edison and his team worked tirelessly, day and night, in their workshops. They experimented with different types of wires, insulators, and safety devices. They had to figure out how to distribute electricity evenly so that all the lights in the district would shine with consistent brightness. It was a constant process of trial and error, of building and rebuilding, of testing and improving. But Edison was driven by his vision. He knew that electric light was the future. He could imagine the streets of New York transformed, safer, and more vibrant than ever before. He saw homes and businesses bathed in clean, bright light, replacing the dim and smoky gas lamps. This vision kept him going through the long hours and the many setbacks. Finally, after months of intense work, the Pearl Street Station was ready. 6 massive dynamos stood humming in the building, ready to send power out into the city. Miles of wires were laid beneath the streets, ready to carry the electric current. Thousands of light bulbs were installed in homes and businesses in the First District, waiting to be switched on. The day came, the 4th of September, 1882. Edison and his team gathered at the Pearl Street Station, along with investors, journalists, and curious onlookers. With the flick of a switch, the dynamos roared to life. Electricity flowed through the wires, and slowly, street by street, building by building, the First District of Lower Manhattan began to glow. It was a historic moment. For the first time, a city was lit by electricity generated in a central power station. People gasped, amazed by the bright, clean light. The streets, once dimly lit by gas, were now transformed into a spectacle of glowing jewels. Businesses stayed open later, and the city felt safer and more alive at night. The impact of Edison's electric light was immediate and profound. Cities would never be the same again. Night, once a time of darkness and limited activity, became a time of opportunity and excitement. Electric light extended the working day, boosted productivity, and changed the way people lived, worked, and socialized. Thomas Edison, the boy who asked why, had not just invented a light bulb. He had illuminated the modern world. Chapter 11. Movies and More. After electric light, people thought Thomas Edison would stop. He had given the world something amazing. But Edison was not a man to stop. He had more ideas, many more. Light was just the beginning. One of his next big ideas was to make pictures move. People loved photographs. What if photographs could move and tell a story? Edison started to work on this new idea in his lab. He called it moving pictures. He invented a machine called the kinetoscope. It was a big wooden box. You looked through a small hole on the top. Inside, you could see pictures moving. It was like magic. The pictures were not big, but they moved. They showed people dancing, animals running, and funny scenes. To make these moving pictures, Edison built a special building. It was made of wood and covered in black paper. People called it the Black Maria, like a police van. The roof could open to let sunlight in because they needed a lot of light to film. Inside this, Black Maria, actors made short films. These films were very simple, not like movies today. They were just short scenes, maybe a few minutes long. People were very excited about the kinetoscope. It was something completely new. They paid money to see these moving pictures in special parlors. It was the start of movies as we know them. Edison had created a new way to tell stories and entertain people. But Edison did not just work on movies. He also went back to an old idea: batteries. For a long time, batteries were heavy and weak. They used acid, which was dangerous. Edison wanted to make a better battery. He wanted a battery that was light, strong, and lasted a long time. He invented the alkaline storage battery. This battery was different. It did not use acid. It used alkali, which was safer. It was also more powerful and lasted longer than old batteries. This new battery was very important. It could be used in cars, trains, and even submarines. Edison's alkaline battery was a big success. It showed that he could invent in many different areas, not just light. He moved easily from light to sound, to moving pictures to batteries. He was interested in everything. Besides these big inventions, Edison also made many smaller things. He invented a machine to help businesses write letters faster, called the Ediphone. It was like a talking typewriter. He made improvements to cement, making it stronger. He even invented a new kind of candy wrapper. Thomas Edison was a man of many ideas. He never stopped inventing. He was always looking for new problems to solve and new things to create. His mind was like a factory, always working, always producing new inventions that would change the world. He was not just the man of light. He was much, much more. Chapter 12. Working for the Navy. The world changed again. This time, it was not about light or sound. It was about war. In Europe, countries were fighting. America wanted to stay out of the fight, but it needed to be ready. The government asked for help from the smartest people in the country, inventors and scientists. And of course, they asked Thomas Edison. Edison was not a young man anymore. He was in his 70s. His hearing was almost gone, but his mind was still sharp. When the government called, he answered. He believed it was his duty to help America. The Navy needed new ideas for defense. They created a special group called the Naval Consulting Board, and they asked Edison to be the head of it. Edison was surprised, but he said yes. He became president of the Naval Consulting Board. It was a big job. He had to work with many other smart people. They had to think about new weapons and new ways to protect ships. Edison was excited about this new challenge. He had always loved to solve problems, and this was a very important problem. He started to work with the same energy he used for his inventions. He went to Washington to meet with Navy officers. He talked about submarines and battleships. He thought about torpedoes and bombs. Some people were surprised that Edison was working on weapons. He was known for things that helped people, like light and music. But Edison said war was also a problem that needed to be solved. He said he wanted to make war less terrible. He thought that new inventions could make wars shorter and less bloody. This might sound strange, but Edison believed that technology could make the world safer, even in war. He didn't just sit in meetings in Washington. Edison wanted to do experiments. He used his laboratory in West Orange to test new ideas for the Navy. He worked on many different things. One idea was to make ships harder to see underwater. He thought about ways to hide submarines. He also worked on better ways to detect submarines. He wanted to protect ships from attack. Edison was very hands-on, even in this new job. He didn't just tell other people what to do. He worked with his team, side by side. He was always in the lab, testing and building things. He was like a general, but his army was made of scientists and engineers. His weapons were ideas and inventions. He was given a new title, Commodore Edison. It sounded important, like a real Navy officer. But Edison didn't care much about titles or uniforms. He just wanted to work. He didn't even want to wear a uniform. He said he wanted to be able to tell an admiral what he thought, even if it wasn't polite. Edison took his new job very seriously. He believed that America had to be strong. He saw that the war in Europe was becoming bigger and more dangerous. He wanted to make sure America was ready to defend itself. He put all his energy and his famous mind to work for the Navy. Even though he was old and deaf, he was still a force to be reckoned with. He was determined to help his country, just like he was always determined to invent new things. He was Thomas Edison, and he was ready for a new kind of fight. Chapter 13. Growing Rubber. When Thomas Edison was 73 years old, most people thought he would relax. He was famous and had invented many things, but Edison was not like most people. He was still curious and wanted to invent new things. His new idea was very different from light bulbs and phonographs. He wanted to grow rubber. Rubber was very important in the 1920s. Cars needed rubber for tires. Factories used rubber for machines. But most rubber came from far away, from other countries. Edison's friends, Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, were worried about this. Ford made cars, and Firestone made tires. They needed a lot of rubber. They asked Edison, "Can you grow rubber in America?" Edison liked a challenge. He started to read books about plants and rubber. He learned that rubber comes from a milky liquid called latex. This latex is in some plants. Edison decided to find a plant that could grow in America and make good rubber. He started to experiment. He tried many plants. He looked at milkweed, wild lettuce, and even hemp. He cut the plants and checked if they had latex. He tested over 17,000 different plants. It was a lot of work. Many plants did not have enough rubber. Some plants had rubber, but it was not good quality. It was sticky and weak. Edison did not give up. He believed he could find the right plant. He thought about plants that grew fast and did not need much care. He wanted a plant that machines could harvest easily. He started to study a plant called guayule. It grew in the desert. It seemed promising. He also tried a vine called cryptostegia. It grew fast, but it was hard to harvest. He even considered fig trees and hemp. After many experiments, Edison found a plant he liked. It was a type of goldenrod. Most people thought goldenrod was just a weed, but Edison saw something special in it. He called his goldenrod Solidago Edisonia. He worked hard to make this goldenrod better. He wanted to grow it to make rubber for America. Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone were happy that Edison was working on rubber. They knew how important it was for America to have its own rubber supply. They gave Edison money to help his research. They created a company called the Edison Botanic Research Corporation. This company would help Edison find and grow rubber plants in America. Edison, with the help of Ford and Firestone, started a new adventure. He was old, but his mind was still young and full of ideas. He was on a new quest, searching for rubber in the world of plants. He hoped to solve the rubber problem and help America become stronger and more prosperous. For Thomas Edison, there was always a new problem to solve, always something new to invent. Chapter 14. A famous man. By the 1920s, Thomas Edison was very, very famous. People everywhere knew his name. If you asked someone to name a great American, many would say Edison. A big newspaper, the New York Times, even had a poll. They asked people, "Who is the greatest living American?" The answer was clear: Thomas Edison. People called him a genius. This word means someone very, very smart and inventive. And Edison was certainly that. He had invented so many things that made life different for everyone. His name was known not just in America, but all over the world. When he turned 80, the townspeople of Fort Myers, Florida, made a big celebration. Schoolgirls in white dresses came to see him. The governor of Florida called him a genius. Edison just shook his head. He didn't like being called that. But it was true. Think of all the things he had created. The phonograph, the movie camera, and of course, the electric light bulb. These were not small things. They were big changes for the world. Even famous scientists were impressed. Albert Einstein, a very smart man himself, said about Edison, "An inventive spirit has filled his own life and all our existence with bright light." Henry Ford, who made cars, said Edison's work was etched in light and sound on the daily and hourly life of the world. Even the President of the United States, Herbert Hoover, said, "He multiplied light and dissolved darkness." These were strong words from important people. But Edison did not always like the attention. He was a simple man, even though he was famous. He didn't think he was a superhuman. He knew he worked hard, very hard. He often worked 18 hours a day. He didn't think he was magically pulling inventions from heaven. Some people thought he was a miraculous robot or a disembodied brain. They thought his success was effortless and assured. They imagined him as someone who never got tired, who just invented things without trying. His own son, Charles, knew this was not true. Charles said that the picture people had of his father was not quite accurate. Edison himself agreed. He didn't think he was special in some magical way. He said, "Everything on earth depends on will." He meant that you have to want to do something very much and work hard to make it happen. He said, "I never had an idea in my life. I've got no imagination. I never dream." This sounds strange, coming from such an inventor, but he explained what he meant. "My so-called inventions already existed in the environment I took them out." He believed that inventions were already there, waiting to be discovered. It was the person who worked hard, the industrious one, who found them. Edison said, "I've created nothing. Nobody does. There's no such thing as an idea being brain-born. Everything comes from the outside." He thought that ideas were all around us, in the world. You just had to be there, in your laboratory, working day and night, to catch it when it came. For Edison, being famous was not about being special, but about working hard and being ready to find the ideas that were already waiting. Chapter 15. The End of the Light. As the years went by, Thomas Edison, the man who had given the world so much light, began to feel his own light dimming. He was an old man now, his body tired, but his mind still full of ideas. Even when he was 84 years old, he still pretended to hear the cheers of the crowds. He let schoolgirls in white dresses walk with him and smiled for the cameras, even though his body was weak. He went to the dedication of a bridge named after him, a bridge to the future he had helped build. But the truth was, his energy was fading, like a light bulb growing dim. He lived on milk, just like when he was a baby. He drank 7 pints of warm milk each day to soothe the pain in his stomach. For years, he had eaten very little, following the idea that a hungry man thinks more clearly. But now, his body was tired from a long life of hard work and little food. His kidneys were failing, and he had diabetes. He was Thomas Edison, famously strong, but even he could not last forever. He had burned his eyes studying bright light. He had acid burns and shocks from his experiments. He had breathed in mine dust. He was like a machine that had worked too hard for too long. Now, even this amazing machine was starting to break down. But he had lived a full life, a life that had changed the world. In a last radio message to his country, his voice was weak, but his message was strong. Be courageous. He had seen many hard times in America, many depressions in business, but he believed America always came back stronger. He wanted people to be brave, just like he had been his whole life. He asked for just 5 more years. 5 more years to finish his work with plants and rubber. He wanted to give America its own rubber crop, so it would not depend on other countries. He knew it was important, even as his own body was failing. But when he arrived home in New Jersey, everyone could see he would not see another spring. He was very frail and needed help to walk. His children came to greet him. Outside, a thunderstorm raged, as if nature itself knew something was ending. For months, he stayed at Glenmont, his mansion. He did not go to his labs, something he had always done, even when he was sick. Then, one day in August, he dressed to go out, like he was going on a trip to the country. But he collapsed at the door. He was carried to his bed, and doctors rushed to his side. The news spread quickly. Thomas Edison was failing. Newsrooms around the world started to update his obituary. They had been doing this for 53 years, ever since the phonograph made him famous. It was hard to put all of his inventions into words. Over 1,000 machines, systems, ideas, all patented by one man. And this man was almost completely deaf. He had invented talking dolls and machines that could record voices. He made the carbon telephone transmitter. He created ways to make sound clearer and louder. He even made a machine to listen to the sun. He was most famous for the light bulb. He had not just invented a bulb, but a whole system of electric light, the first in the world. One night in September 1882, he turned a switch, and Lower Manhattan became a city of glowing jewels. From his amazing brain and his busy hands came the stock ticker, the electric meter, the battery, the movie camera, and moving pictures with sound and color. He built the world's first film studio and the world's biggest rock crusher. He dreamed up ways to send many telegraph messages at once. If he hadn't been busy with other things, he could have invented radio too. He always made things that were useful and would make money. He was an entrepreneur, starting over 100 companies. But more than that, he was an inventor. He needed to invent, like some people need to breathe. Even on his honeymoons, he was full of new ideas. Once, in a single day, he wrote down 112 new inventions, from a cotton-picking machine to ink for blind people. When he was old, his inventing slowed down, but it never stopped completely. Even in his last year, he applied for a patent. It was for a way to electroplate precious stones. He was always working, always creating, until the very end. After a week in bed, he tried to read a textbook about diabetes. He wanted to learn how to fix his own body, like he fixed machines. But even his great brain could not fix old age. He was very weak, but he still talked about going back to his lab. He had a roll-top desk there, with books about science and inventions all around him. He moved between chemistry and physics and botany, always learning and experimenting. For the last 8 years, he had been obsessed with plants, trying to find a way to grow rubber in America. His friends, Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, needed rubber for their cars and tires. They helped him with his rubber project. After testing thousands of plants, he thought goldenrod might be the answer. It was a common weed, but he believed he could make it produce rubber. Now, as he lay in bed, someone brought him chunks of rubber made by his team in Florida from goldenrod. Charles Edison, his son, told reporters that the old man was very happy to see it. But it was too late. His health grew worse. He said goodbye to his wife and children. He could barely see or hear anymore. The only voice he seemed to hear was Mina's, shouting in his ear, "Dear, how are you?" The family gathered at his mansion. Even his children from his first marriage, whom he had not always treated well, were there. They waited downstairs, while doctors and nurses watched over him upstairs. The world waited too. President Hoover asked for updates. The Pope sent messages of concern. People around the world knew that a great light was about to go out. On the 18th of October, 1931, at 3:24 a.m., Thomas Alva Edison died. 2 minutes later, the clock in his library stopped ticking, as if time itself had paused to mark the end of an era. The world mourned the man who had multiplied light and chased away darkness. His work was done, but his light would shine forever. Thomas Edison was a man of many inventions. He gave us the phonograph to listen to music, the light bulb to brighten our nights, and movies to watch stories unfold. But more than just things, Edison gave us a way of thinking. He showed us that asking why is important. He taught us that even when things are hard, we must keep trying. He faced deafness and many failures, but he never stopped working. He was always curious, always wanting to learn, and always ready to work hard for his dreams. Because of Edison, our world is brighter, louder, and moves in ways he only imagined. From our homes to our cities, his ideas are everywhere. He showed us the power of electricity and the power of one person to change everything. Edison's story is a reminder that even a boy who struggled in school, a boy who could not hear the world like others, could still become a hero. His life tells us that with courage and hard work, we too can bring light into the darkness and make the impossible possible. Thomas Edison's light still shines, inspiring us to be brave, to be curious, and to never give up on our own bright ideas.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.